Hello guys, this week I played around with the new blue Gunlancer. This video is a continuation video from the red Gunlancer review. As I mentioned before, I always try things myself to experience it, and Season 3 and new arc passive system only requires me to use silver for gem change, so I get to try blue Gunlancer for the week. This video will show some of the basics to understand how the blue Gunlancer will operate and how it usually feels. Hopefully this helps any of the new, existing, or new Gunlancer players on what path to take. Let's go with the basics. As I mentioned before, there is a document made by the global community where you can cross-reference the new arc passive nodes. So going from the top on the evolution, this is where you allocate your combat stats. I have full spec and then I have crit. You can also go swiftness, but blue Gunlancers tend to lack crit, so I have allocated it on crit, and I've been trying back and forth, and there's a downside and a good side for it, but I ended up using spec crit more. Second tier and the third tier is where you allocate the old relic set attributes. On second tier, we have Keen Sense. This gives 8% crit rate and 10% damage. And I have Limit Breaking for 10% damage. You could also use Forbidden Spell. Some people do say they use Forbidden Spell because it's 10% damage for all mana skills. But apparently for blue Gunlancers, there's this X skill, and it's an identity skill since it doesn't use mana. And that skill itself does decent amount of damage, so that one doesn't really work. And mana is not really lacking on the new Gunlancer either. And some others take Operation Training because it gives you 4% additional cooldown. And I did try it, but the cooldown rotation was decent, so I don't think it's necessary to use that either. So I have 2 on Keen Sense and then 1 on Limit Breaking. Again, all this stuff could be subject to change. On the third tier, we have Full Force Smite. I use this as level 2. It increases your crit rate to 24% and it gives you 4% more damage. Some people actually allocated on Limitless Magic to get additional cooldown, and some others got Juggernaut for additional attack speed. But generally, I think to increase your crit rate, since it gives you 24%, it has a lot of value to it. I think most people will be going Full Force Smite. As for the fourth tier, these are the new stuff. We have Blunt Spike, and we have Stand Up Fighting, and then we have Mana Forge. Red Gunlancer uses Mana Forge, and they can also use Blunt Spike or Stand Up Fighting. But Blue Gunlancer, I think the only tier 4 node that you could use is Stand Up Fighting. The reason why is because Mana Forge requires you to have a skill that spends more than 480 mana to get the full efficiency. But all the skills that the Blue Gunlancer has uses less mana, so the Mana Forge is not as efficient. And as for Blunt Spike, for obvious reasons, Blue Gunlancer just doesn't have enough crit to actually activate this. Additionally, for Stand Up Fighting, if you go over it, you get stack every 2 seconds if you lose them, and you lose 1 stack if you get paralysis, and you lose 3 stacks when knocked down. Fortunately, Blue Gunlancer uses the Z combat readiness skill most of the time, so it's really hard for Blue Gunlancers to be knocked down. So therefore, stand-up fighting is one of the easiest node that we can have upkeep on. So therefore, I think stand-up fighting is probably the best node for the blue Gunlancer to take. Going over Enlightenment tab. So as you can see, the Enlightenment tab, I don't have enough ancient accessories just yet. I'm shopping them right now. I'm probably going to have full ancient accessories before Belshazzar raid. But generally, in order for you to have the same effect as a tier 3, level 3 class engraving, you need to have 72 points because it's 24 plus 24 plus 24. These 3 leveled up means you have level 3 class engraving. And then any additional bonus points you can allocate on the side, and even if I don't activate the tier 4 stuff, I can access front dash too, just like so, because the requirement is having 24 points on tier 3 in order for you to access tier 4. So with additional 8 points that I got from ancient accessories, etc., I leveled up the 4th tier node and I leveled up the front dash for now. So let's talk about the tier 4 node first. First, I know a bunch of you guys have been asking how come I don't use bash when I'm playing blue Gunlancer right now. Blue Gunlancer, you need to use bash because you have this thing called a battle ready tripod on the 2nd row. And what this does is if you use the skill for 6 seconds, you have 33.5% damage increase. Therefore, blue Gunlancer is more of a cycle dealer starting with bash. So you use bash, leap attack, guardian thunderbolt, etc. If you activate the 4th tier node on the new blue Gunlancer, you have this thing called the Vanguard's Mindset. What this does is it grants you battle ready effect automatically, and the damage increases 42% instead. And the stacks that you can get from battle ready, it goes up to 4 instead of 3. So if I show you an example, as long as I press my Z and get into combat readiness, I have this icon called battle ready. As long as I have the shield on, all my normal skill damages is going to have a 42% damage increase. And as for battle ready stacks, as long as I attack it, I have this new icon now, and it goes up to 4 stacks. So it'll be 4 times 4, which is 16%. If I level up the tier 4 node up to level 3, this goes up to 6 stacks, which is 24%, and the battle ready default effect is going to be 48%, which is huge. Therefore, this is the reason why you don't have to use bash, because you get it as a passive effect. Now let's go over some of the side notes. The side notes on the left in Power Efficiency and Lance Master are both red Gunlancer attributes. So on the right side, we have what the blue Gunlancer can use. One is Tactical Training and Tactical Maneuver. Tactical Maneuver is more of a neutral one where both red and blue can use it. It gives you attack speed and it makes your dash go front. And then you can cancel skills in between, just like so. And as for Tactical Training, you get bonus crit rate. You get 0.8% crit rate, and if you go on Combat Readiness, you get 1.6% crit rate, and your X skill itself gets 1.6% crit rate as well. And if you max this up, you get additional 4% crit rate when you're not in Combat Readiness mode, and when you're in Combat Readiness mode, you'll get bonus additional 8% crit rate. This is also very important because imagine you level this up to max, which it requires 10 points. You'll be having crit points here up to 8%, and then we have 24% here, and then you have 8% there, and then you can allocate crit combat stats to have more crit rate here. So in this point, even without myself investing into crit, right now I have 55.62% crit rate with the arc passive stuff enabled, and since I have adrenaline, this 55.62% changes into 69% because adrenaline gives you 14%. Now all this stuff can be improved because the rings also give you crit rate now if you get a really good one. The side notes give you crit rate, so I think it can jump from anywhere from 70% to 80% crit rate, which is really nice, especially if you get a crit synergy in your team too. So the problem of allocating crit has been fixed on the blue Gunlancer on the arc passive, and if you happen to allocate a lot of crit from other aspects, you can probably invest this crit combat stat into swiftness for more swifty play and have faster cooldown. Now let's go over the skills. Starting with Shield Bash, this is going to be the new synergy skill. I put the synergy point here, 8 seconds for 12%, and then we have the two other nodes for damage, and the shield bash itself does decent amount of damage, so you have both gens on this, and the animation is pretty short and it moves you forward as well, so this is probably the skill that most people are using. Next we have leap attack. So for leap attack, everyone has this differently, and I think this is because of preference based, and it filters from do you want to jump twice or you want to have a big jump. Personally, I think this big jump is really funny, so I've been using this more, and it gives you 2 ticks of big damage. But there are some people that use the 2 double jumps. This is 4 ticks total. It's just that the characteristics is if you have the big jump, you use the cooldown tripod. If you use the small jump, you use the damage tripod because the cooldown is much shorter. So you just have 2 choices, the cooldown with the big leap or damage with the 2 small leaps. Next we have shield charge. The tripod is the same as the season 2 blue Gunlancer. You have quick pace, adding 2 gems on them to rotate it in between leap attack and Guardian Thunderbolt. Dash Upper Fire, we got it as cooldown and wide range. For the rune here, for those of you who don't know, this is basically a vision rune. It's Gale Wind plus Overwhelm. Same. It's the same as the blue Gale Wind. One other thing that's interesting is as a blue Gunlancer, you're actually not using this skill at all except countering because it doesn't do that much damage. And the cooldown itself is about 9 seconds. So even if you don't have 2 counters, you do feel a little bit controlled because you always have this skill ready, and whenever the boss is ready to counter, you have a skill ready to go. But it doesn't rotate as fast. Let's say you have a mechanic where it requires you to counter twice really quickly. You can't do any of those plays anymore. Red Gunlancer can do it still, but blue Gunlancer can't. Going over to Guardian Thunderbolt, so one thing that I was really surprised about is this skill does a lot of damage now. You do have the same tripod, and whenever I got buffs, the highest I've seen during Behemoth, obviously the Behemoth raid gives you some buffs and you do double damage on the head. I've seen this thing do more than 1 billion each tick, and then generally by average if it crits, you do like 300 to 400 mil. And that itself is actually really big, and the animation is short where it can just compress damage, and it's super easy to land as well. So from there, I think this is one of the reasons why some reds are switching to blue, because Guardians Thunderbolt do a decent amount of damage and they feel that it's okay. Okay, next we have Shield Shock. So Shield Shock, instead of anything else, you add the cooldown tripod and then you do the range, and then you have second turbulence. And the reason why is because you're using this skill to activate quick recharge. Before, you were not able to use this skill as much because you had to add bash into it, but you can squeeze this skill in to use it as sub damage, and then you can use it to hopefully activate quick recharge. That is the purpose of it, and it does make the blue Gunlancer a little bit more optimal. Next, we have the Shout, which is a really unique skill for Gunlancer, one of the best ones. It does give you the synergy for 12 seconds, and for the spec crit blue Gunlancer, if I use the Shadow Hatred, the cooldown is 19 seconds. The only one thing I kind of don't like about blue Gunlancer is because the Shadow Hatred cooldown is too long. When I play red, I tend to rotate this as much as I can to give more damage synergy to my team. But for blue Gunlancer, I will need to be a little bit more careful. Like, let's say the boss is about to be stunned. I need to make sure that I use synergy when I know that my teammate's doing big damages. So this stuff can also be changed. For example, let's say I allocate swiftness instead of crit. This does go down up to like 17 seconds, which is good. And then if I get like level 10 cooldown gem in the future, maybe it can go about to 16 seconds. Last, this is the Nalasha skill, one of the best utility skills I like. You can use either Purify or DR. And unlike the red Gunlancer, you can actually fully efficiently use Survive Tripod, so I can give shield to the team. So there are some blue Gunlancer players in Korea that doesn't use Nalasha as a blue Gunlancer, and they replace this with Charge Stinger or Surge Cannon or Bash. And for each of them, Charge Stinger, they kind of use it as a gap closer, and Surge Cannon, they kind of use it for additional stagger, and Bash, same thing, additional stagger and the second counter. I don't know why they would do that, but for me personally, I don't know why Gunlancer would take away Nella in the first place, because I think Nella and the Shadow Hatred and giving 2 synergies to the team is what Gunlancer very valuable to a raid. And this is also why Gunlancer is one of the best classes to take for blind procs, because it does make the raid team very, very stable, and they have really good utility to bring it for the team. For me personally, I would never not take Nella, even if I play red or blue. Going over for the awakenings, you could use the crit increase awakening, but I really like the first awakening where you get the super armor for, so I'm gonna stick with using the first awakening. And going over the identity meter attack, which is the battlefield shield, you just jump up and then you get super armor to your team. This is a really good skill as well. And one thing I was super surprised about was this does decent damage as well, so you will need to rotate this in somehow. So I'm not too good with it at the moment, but this is some of the more interesting things that you could utilize when you're playing blue. So super simple, if I go over the new blue Gunlancer, it's even easier now. You start with Shout to get the shield, or you can use your Awakening to get the shield. You put your synergy in, and then you use Guardian Thunderbolt, and then use your leap attack, and then use your shield charge, and then use synergy again, and then you kind of use your shield shock to activate and hope to activate quick recharge, and then you keep rotating back and forth. And in between, if you're running out of shield, you can use Shadow Hatred to refill it back up, and then you keep rotating your skills as a piano, like a piano format. So instead of a cycle dealer, you're kind of cycling through all your DPS skills while trying to activate the quick recharge rune to get the skill back. Obviously, this feels a lot slower because I don't have any yearning effect on me. If I do have yearning, it gets a little faster. So you're kind of grouping these 3 skills together: the leap attack, Guardian Thunderbolt, and shield charge. And then you kind of use shield bash in rotation to give synergy to your team. And when you're done with everything, you're using shield shock. And between all of this stuff, when everything's in cooldown, sometimes you could use your battlefield shield to help your teammate plus do damage as well. It does about the same as your main DPS skills. One thing that I'm kind of uncomfortable right now is when you're using Shadow Hatred and then going to combat readiness. Sometimes I click combat readiness, but the character is stuck in animation, so it ignores the combat readiness pose and it just uses the Guardian Lightning without combat readiness, right? And this is really bad because I'm losing so much damage potential. So those are the stuff that I'm kind of like not used to, because I can't tell. I used the Shadow Hatred and I thought I pressed Z, but I didn't really press Z. So those are the things I make mistakes on right now. But this is probably due to lack of experience. But this is where I kind of felt a little clunkiness to the class. Also, I had a lot of trouble squeezing in spacebar within the cycle because, as noticed here, I'm rotating my skills and I really don't have anywhere to like kind of squeeze in my spacebar except like using the shield shock. This just requires me to just have more practice, but it's kind of tough for me to use spacebar in between because I have a lot of stuff going on, because the animation, the attack animation itself is a lot longer than the red Gunlancer. But again, all this stuff, it just requires me to get more used to, and then that should be okay. So on a side note, we are getting the new trixion that allows us to test arc passive soon. Since the builds are not final and really hard to test things out, I am still gathering information to fortify my decision in the future on which build I should take for the new raid Bro Shaza in September. So yes, I'm still back and forth right now because honestly, I thought Blue Gunlancer was not gonna be fun, but it's a lot more fun than I thought it would be. I didn't like it as much back at Season 2, but right now it's super simple to play and your performance is very stable. And again, I like playing simple classes, so both red and blue right now are really good fit for me, and I'm okay with it right now. Therefore, I can't really come up with a verdict now. But I'm planning to stay blue for a bit to experience a little more, and I don't want to use the silver to roll back my gems to red because it's going to cost me like 30 plus million silvers. And since we're going to get the arc passive trixion, I can try both builds a little more in the future too. Additionally, so far, I believe the reason why some players are switching from red to blue is because average performance wise, I think Blue Gunlancer is definitely in the upper hand due to its simplicity and damage gains they have gotten from the arc passive, and they have more utility than red too now. Even though the new entropy doesn't require directional attacks, which made red not focus head position as mandatory, it seems to be doing the same damage or even lower even though you're having a decent uptime. And blue wise, as you guys know, they don't need to focus on head attacks, they can just use skills and then they tend to have a larger radius for it. Back then it was not as high as red, but right now as long as you have good rotation, you should have about the same or maybe a little more. That one needs to run through more testing, but utility and playstyle wise, blue does have an upper hand of being more simple, but to me it does feel a little bit more clunky compared to red. So therefore, if you're counting into like blind procs or if you're counting into first release raids, it does feel like a much safer bet to run blue for blind procs for new raids. It's because again, it's easier to have decent uptime as blue, and blue has the X skill for utility, Nella for utility, and you can lock your counter, you can use counter anytime you want. All that stuff is really good for new raids. So I'm probably going to end the video here. All of this is going to be brought up again in a new video when I decide on the build, and there will be more thought process into it. Until then, I'll be enjoying more blue for now. Hope this helps, guys. Thanks. Bye bye.